The empty chapel, the peonies, were wilting by the time Dahlia Winters accepted that Frederick wasn't coming. She sat alone in the bridal suite of St. Augustine's Chapel, still wearing her ivory gown with its delicate lace overlay. The dress they had chosen together on a rainy Tuesday afternoon 6 months ago. Outside, hushed voices filtered through the oak door as her mother and sister Penelope dismissed the last of the guests. He must have had an accident. Penelope had insisted hours earlier, her voice tight with forced optimism. But the calls to hospitals yielded nothing. Frederick's phone went straight to voicemail. His apartment was empty, bed neatly made. As afternoon light faded into evening, Dahlia removed her veil with trembling hands. Frederick asked her, the man who wrote her poetry on coffee shop napkins, who stayed up all night helping her prepare for her architecture licensing exam, who proposed beneath the autumn leaves in Prospect Park, had vanished without a word. Dahlia. Her mother's voice was gentle from the doorway. Julian is here to drive us home. Julian, her childhood friend who had flown in from Seattle to be a groomsman, who had arrived at the church to find the groom missing and the bride in shock. I just need another minute, Dahlia said, her voice hollow. When the door closed, she reached for her phone and dialed Frederick's number one last time. The familiar voice greeted her. This is Frederick Astor. Please leave a message. I don't understand, she whispered after the beep. I saw you last night at the rehearsal dinner. You kissed me goodbye and said tomorrow would be the happiest day of our lives. What happened between then and now? Where are you? The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Back at her apartment, their apartment, filled with Frederick's books and the antique reading lamp he'd restored. Dahlia sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her wedding dress. Penelope had offered to stay, but Dahlia needed solitude more than comfort. 3 years together, not once had Frederick been unreliable or distant. His literary students at the university adored him for his consistency and compassion. His colleagues respected his quiet dedication. Every Thursday, he brought Dahlia fresh flowers from the market on his way home, never forgetting. Not even during finals week when he graded papers until dawn. People don't just disappear, she told the empty room, but he had. The following days passed in a blur of concerned calls and pitying glances. Frederick's department head at the university was baffled. He submitted his grades early last week, Professor Hammond explained. Said he might need personal time after the wedding. About leaving. Shh. Frederick's closest friend Oliver seemed genuinely shocked. I was with him at the bachelor party 2 nights ago. He was happy, Dahlia. Nervous but happy. Dear police. Took a report, but weren't optimistic. Adults have the right to leave, the officer said gently. No signs of foul play at his office or apartment. His passport hasn't been used. Sometimes people just walk away. But Dahlia knew better. The Frederick she loved would never walk away without explanation. Something was terribly wrong. A week after the wedding that wasn't, she finally hung up the dress that still smelled faintly of her perfume. As she did, something fell from the pocket, a small envelope with her name in Frederick's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a simple note. Forgive me for what must seem unforgivable. Remember the night we met? The answers are where we began. Dahlia clutched the paper to her chest, her first real clue in a mystery she never wanted to solve. Ink and secrets, the diagnosis glared up at Dahlia from Frederick's careful handwriting. Progressive supranuclear palsy, a rare neurodegenerative disease that would gradually rob him of movement, speech, and eventually his ability to swallow or breathe independently. She spent the night researching it online. Each article more devastating than the last, the journal entries chronicled. Frederick's 18-month journey from the first symptoms, subtle changes in his balance, occasional slurring of words during lectures to the final diagnosis. He'd hidden it all from her, scheduling appointments during his office hours, attributing his fatigue to insomnia, wearing a wrist brace to disguise the tremors. I started writing this journal when words came easily. He'd written 3 months before their wedding. I fear the day when they won't. When I can no longer tell Dahlia how the sunlight looks in her hair or how her laugh makes me forget. If only for a moment, what's happening to my body? Dahlia read through the night, piecing together the fragments of a secret life Frederick had kept hidden behind smiles and reassurances. There were moments of hope. A specialist in Boston who mentioned experimental treatments, the possibility of a clinical trial followed by crushing disappointments when insurance denied coverage or initial tests showed poor compatibility. The entries became more desperate as their wedding approached. I had another fall today. Managed to catch myself on the desk before Dahlia noticed. How long can I keep pretending? Dr. Whitaker says my deterioration is unusually rapid. Without intervention, I might need a wheelchair within a year. How can I ask Dahlia to bind herself to this future? And later, Dr. Whitaker called. The Swiss clinic has accepted my application for their experimental treatment program. It's absurdly expensive and success rates are uncertain, but it's my only hope now. The first available slot is the day after our wedding. The irony is unbearable. The final pages revealed Frederick's agonizing decision. He'd liquidated his modest investments and taken a loan against his life insurance to pay for the treatment. He'd arranged everything in secret flights, accommodations near the clinic, a temporary apartment for what might be months of therapy. I've written and torn up a dozen letters to Dahlia, read the entry from 3 days before their wedding. How do you tell the woman you love that you're choosing to disappear rather than burden her? That you're denying her the choice to stand by you because you can't bear to watch the light in her eyes slowly transform into pity and obligation? Last entry written the night before their wedding. Contained an address in Zurich and the name of the clinic, Hoffman Neurological Institute. If she finds this journal, it means I've failed her twice, first by leaving, and then by not hiding the truth well enough. But perhaps it's selfish to hope she never discovers it. Part of me wants her to know I left out of love, not cowardice. Another part hopes she'll forget me entirely and build a life unburdened by what-ifs and might-have-beens. Dahlia closed the journal and reached for her phone. It was 3 a.m., but she didn't hesitate as she dialed Penelope's number. I need your help, she said, when her sister answered groggily. I'm going to Switzerland. Hollow spaces. Dahlia traced her fingers over Frederick's handwriting for the 100th time. The answers are where we began. Their beginning had been at the Richardson Memorial Library, where she'd been researching architectural preservation, and he'd been organizing a faculty poetry reading. They'd reached for the same book, a rare volume on Gothic revival, and I spent the next 3 hours talking by the marble staircase. 3 weeks after being abandoned at the altar, Dahlia found herself walking through the library's grand entrance. The familiar scent of old books and lemon polish brought a wave of memories, Frederick guiding her to hidden corners with the best natural light. Their whispered conversations between the stacks, stolen kisses by the rare manuscripts collection. Ms. Winter's voice startled her from her thoughts. Eleanor Blackwood, the head librarian who had witnessed their first meeting, stood before her with concerned eyes. I haven't seen you since. Well, I'm sorry about everything. Thank you, Dahlia replied mechanically, the words worn smooth from repetition. I'm actually here because Frederick left a note. He said the answers were where we began. Eleanor's expression shifted subtly. He was here, you know, about 2 days before your wedding. Spent hours in the poetry section. I thought he was preparing something special for the ceremony. The poetry section, 3rd floor, West Wing, where they'd had their first real conversation. About Sylvia Plath. Dahlia thanked Eleanor and made her way up the marble staircase, each step heavier than the last. The poetry section was empty that afternoon. Dahlia walked slowly along the shelves, running her fingers along spines of books Frederick had recommended over the years. What was she looking for? A letter? Another clue? At the end of the aisle stood the small alcove with the green velvet reading chair where Frederick had first read her his own poetry. On the small table beside it sat a book that looked recently disturbed, Keats' collected works. Their favorite. She opened it to find a small key taped to the inside cover. Dahlia recognized it immediately. The spare key to Frederick's university office. Professor Hammond was reluctant, but eventually agreed to let her into Frederick's office. We're packing his things next week, he explained. He submitted his resignation by email 2 days after. Well, you know, no explanation, just a formal letter and instructions to donate his books to the student library. The office was just as she remembered, walls lined with bookshelves, desk perpetually covered in student papers and literary journals. The only personal items were a photo of Dahlia, on the windowsill, and the antique fountain pen she'd given him for his birthday. She searched methodically, finding nothing until she noticed something odd about the bookshelf behind his desk. Collected works of Virginia Woolf, which Frederick had alphabetized with his other books, was now sitting apart on the top shelf. When she pulled it down, she found it wasn't a book at all, but a hollow box designed to look like a book. Inside was a leather-bound journal she'd never seen before. The first entry was dated 18 months ago. Dr. Whitaker confirmed today. What I've suspected for weeks is the tremors aren't stress or overwork. The disease has a name now and a timeline. How do I tell Dahlia that the future we've planned might be measured in months rather than decades? Chair, the journal clutched to her chest. Entries blurred together as she flipped through pages documenting secret doctor visits, experimental treatments, and Frederick's growing fear. The symptoms are progressing faster than expected, read an entry from 6 months ago. Dr. Whitaker says the clinical trial in Switzerland is my best hope, but even that is experimental. Dahlia deserves better than to be chained to a dying man. The most recent entry, dated the night before their wedding, made her breath catch. I've made all the arrangements. By this time tomorrow, I'll be on my way to Zurich. Dr. Whitaker believes the treatment might extend my life, but the side effects are severe. I can't bear for Dahlia to watch me deteriorate, to put her life on hold for what might be a lost cause. Better she'll hate me for leaving than waste her youth as a caretaker. I've hidden this journal where she might eventually find it. Once enough. Time has passed for her to move on. Fate is kind. She'll never need to read these words at all. Dahlia closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Frederick hadn't abandoned her. He'd been trying, in his misguided way, to spare her. You idiot, she whispered to the empty office. Did you really think I wouldn't come looking for you? Searching shadows, Zurich greeted Dahlia with steady rain and gray skies that matched her mood. The taxi driver struggled with her suitcase as she checked the address from Frederick's journal for the 5th time. The Hoffman Neurological Institute stood on the outskirts of the city, a sleek, modern building nestled against the backdrop of distant Alps. I'm looking for information about a patient, Dahlia told the receptionist in halting German she'd practiced. On the flight, Frederick Astor. American. He would have arrived about 6 weeks ago. The woman's professional smile never wavered. I cannot confirm or deny patient information without authorization. Patient confidentiality is strictly enforced. Dahlia had anticipated this. She slid Frederick's journal across the counter. I'm his fiancé. He left this for me to find. Please, I just need to know if he's here. The receptionist glanced at the journal but shook her head. I'm sorry. Without legal documentation or the patient's consent, I cannot help you. For 3 days, Dahlia returned to the institute, pleading with different staff members, leaving notes for Dr. Whitaker, who, according to Frederick's journal, had arranged the transfer. No one would confirm Frederick's presence. On the 4th day, as she sat dejected in the institute's cafe, a young doctor sat down across from her. You're the woman asking about Frederick Astor, he said quietly. His name badge identified him as Dr. Tomas Keller. I'm not supposed to speak with you, but I recognize you from his photos. Dahlia's heart leaped. Then he is here. He's alive. Dr. Keller nodded cautiously. I cannot discuss his condition or treatment, but he's been transferred to our residential facility across the city. The treatment protocol is ... intensive. Will you give him something for me? Dahlia pulled out a letter she'd written on the flight. Please, he doesn't have to see me if he doesn't want to. Dr. Keller hesitated before taking the envelope. I make no promises. 2 more days passed with no response. Dahlia extended her hotel reservation, burning through savings she couldn't afford to spend. On the 7th day in Zurich, she received a call from an unknown number. Ms. Winters. The voice was unfamiliar, heavily accented. This is Nurse Geisler from Hoffman Residential Care. I've been instructed to inform you that Mr. Astor has agreed to see you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Please bring identification. The residential facility was smaller than the main institute, surrounded by carefully tended gardens now glistening with spring rain. Dahlia was led through quiet hallways to a sun-filled common room, where a solitary figure sat in a wheelchair by the window. Frederick's back was to her, but she would have recognized him anywhere. His shoulders, once broad and strong, seemed diminished under his sweater. His dark hair, always meticulously styled, had been cut shorter, revealing the nape of his neck. "Frederick," she whispered. He turned, and Dahlia fought to keep her expression neutral. The changes were subtle, but unmistakably a slight drooping around his left eye, a stiffness in his movements. But his eyes, those familiar deep brown eyes, that had always seen straight through to her soul, were unchanged. "You found the journal," he said. His voice was raspier than she remembered, each word carefully formed. "I should have known you wouldn't let me disappear. Did you want to?" Dahlia asked, taking the chair opposite him. Frederick's smile was sad. "I wanted to spare you this." He gestured to himself, to the wheelchair, to the medical facility around them. "The treatment is brutal, Dahlia. Some days I can barely remember my own name through the fog of medication. The prognosis is still uncertain. This disease, it doesn't end well, even in the best-case scenario." "And you decided all this without me?" Dahlia said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You made choices about our life together as if my opinion didn't matter." "I made choices to give you a life without the burden of—" "Don't you dare call loving you a burden," Dahlia interrupted, tears threatening. "You had no right to decide what I could or couldn't handle." "What kind of love did you think I had for you, Frederick? The kind that only works when things are easy?" Frederick looked away, out toward the gardens where spring flowers pushed defiantly through the soil. "I've watched my body betraying me for 18 months, Dahlia. I know exactly what's coming. I couldn't bear the thought of you watching it too. So instead, you left me standing alone at the altar, thinking you'd stopped loving me." Dahlia's voice broke. "Do you have any idea what that did to me?" For the first time, doubt flickered across Frederick's face. "I thought a clean break would be kinder in the long run." "There was nothing kind about it," Dahlia said quietly. "It's not for me, and clearly not for you, facing all this alone." Borrowed time, the Zurich spring bloomed around them as Frederick gradually allowed Dahlia back into his life. First, daily visits to the residential facility, where she witnessed both the harsh reality of his treatment and his determination to fight. Then, as the doctors adjusted his medication and physical therapy showed modest improvements, short excursions to nearby parks and cafes. "The treatment isn't a cure," Dr. Keller explained during a consultation they attended together. "But the early results suggest we might significantly slow the progression. The disease typically advances rapidly, but with this protocol, we're seeing patients maintain function for much longer than expected." "How much longer?" Dahlia asked, the question Frederick had been afraid to voice. Dr. Keller's expression was carefully measured. "Instead of months, perhaps years. Quality of life can be maintained with proper support and continued treatment, but eventually the symptoms will progress." Frederick squeezed Dahlia's hand as they absorbed this information. "Years instead of months, not a lifetime, but time nonetheless." "I've taken a leave of absence from my firm," Dahlia told Frederick. That evening, as they sat in the small apartment he'd rented near the institute. 6 months, possibly extendable. Frederick frowned. "Your career is important, but not more important than this," she interrupted. "I've been in contact with an architectural firm here in Zurich. They're interested in my experience with historical restoration. It's not permanent, just a temporary position while we figure things out." "Dahlia," Frederick said softly, "I left because I didn't want you to put your life on hold for me." She took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "And I came because that wasn't your decision to make." "Not naive, Frederick. Read every article, talked to every doctor. I know exactly what we're facing. It will get worse," he said, his voice barely audible. "Much worse." "Probably," she agreed, "and we'll face that when it comes." "Right. But right now, you're here, I'm here, and we have time. Not as much as we wanted, but more than you thought when you left me." They were married 2 weeks later in the Institute's garden, with Dr. Keller and Nurse Geisler as witnesses. No elaborate ceremony, no ivory dress or chapel filled with flowers, just a people promising to face whatever came together. As spring turned to summer, they established a new routine. Mornings at the Institute for Frederick's treatments, afternoons Exploring Zurich or working on their respective projects, Frederick had begun writing again, a memoir about his journey with the disease. While Dahlia collaborated remotely with her firm in New York and locally with the Zurich architects, there were difficult days when the treatment left. Frederick, too exhausted to leave his bed, when the disease reminded them of its presence with new symptoms or setbacks. But there were beautiful days to picnics by Lake Zurich, concerts in the park, quiet evenings reading together like they used to. "I need you to promise me something," Frederick said one evening as they watched the sunset from their small balcony. His speech had improved with therapy, though the effort was still visible. "When the time comes that I can no longer win." "Things get bad, Frederick. Don't, please. Let me say this." He took a steadying breath. "When that time comes, I need you to remember that leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. Not because I'm better with you, though, but because I robbed us both of choice. I don't want to make that mistake." Again, Dahlia understood what he was trying to say. "So you want us to make decisions together, even the hard ones?" He nodded, relief evident in his eyes. "No more secrets. No more deciding what's best for you without your input." "I can agree to that," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "But you should know I'm stubborn. I'll fight for every good day we can have." "I'm counting on it," Frederick replied, his arm tightening around her. They didn't know how. Many days they had left months, years, perhaps more if the treatment continued to exceed expectations. The future was uncertain, shadowed by the knowledge of what was to come. But they had learned the most important lesson. That time, however limited, was precious only when shared with those you love. In the growing darkness, Frederick recited the poem he'd written for their small wedding, his voice steady and clear. "We are not promised forever. Only this moment, this breath, this chance to love fiercely in the face of time's indifference. And if that is all we have, it is enough." Now at least it was.